Hello. Hi, everyone. Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. Just seeing a nice few faces, friendly faces coming on here, leaving their comments to say hello. It's good to see so many friendly faces. So I'm Becky Paskin. I'm the co-founder of OurWhisky. So if you've ordered a tasting pack, I'm the one who wrote those crazy little notes in your boxes. So hi. Hello. Hi everyone. Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are. So thank you for joining us. I am really pleased to have you along. So the OurWhisky Virtual Whiskey Festival is, as you know, a series of 4 tastings conducted over 4 Thursday evenings. This is the very first one, so thank you for joining us for it. We're going to be tasting through 5 different whiskies today, which you don't know what they are. So those of you who have a tasting pack, thank you for purchasing one. You've got 5 whiskies in there. You probably would have seen, and from the clue I left in the note within there as well, which was a kind of a teaser. We are going to be tasting wild whiskey today. I've got some lovely whiskey makers ready backstage to talk you through those whiskies as well. So just before we start, I want to just talk about what the festival is all about. So the reason why we decided to launch this is because we wanted to give something back to the drinks industry. So the OurWhisky Festival is raising money for the Drinks Trust charity. So this charity is there to support people in the drinks industry who've fallen on hard times. So especially during the coronavirus pandemic, we're hoping to raise money for those people to help them out at the moment. So thank you everyone for taking part, because you're all supporting such a great cause. It's also a great opportunity to taste a lot of different types of whiskey and get to know each other as well. So whichever platform you're watching on, so whether you're on YouTube or on Twitter or Facebook, please leave a comment or a question, and we'll be putting them to everybody as well during the course of the tasting. Now, to start off with, so you'll all have had your tasting pack sent through with your 5 whiskies, hopefully. I know some have been caught up in the post, so I'm really sorry about that, but we'll try and get that sorted for you as soon as possible. There are 5 whiskies in here, so make sure you've got those to hand. You'll also need a glass or 2 or 5. If you do have a Glencairn, then they are preferred. This one is from Whiskey Fest in Chicago in 2015, which I went to, another whiskey festival, which was amazing. If you don't have a Glencairn, then a tumbler like that is perfect as well. If you don't have either of those, then a wine glass will do as well. Also, please make sure you have some water on hand to rinse your mouth out in between. And also, I know one of the whiskies in particular is pretty high ABV, so you might want to add a drop to that as well. So, are you guys ready? We're going to get started. This is so exciting. Right, let's meet the distillers. So, first of all, we have... This is Louise McGuane. She is founder of Chapelgate Irish Whiskey Company. Hi, Louise.
Hi, Becky. Hi, everybody. So excited to be part of this and to help out with such a great cause.
Brilliant. Lovely. Thanks. It's so good to have you on board, Louise. Really is. Next up, we have Dhavall Gandhi from the Lakes Distillery. Hi.
Hi, Becky. Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here, and I'm very excited for this virtual tasting tonight.
Oh, so good to have you involved. Thank you, Dhavall. Next up, we have David Vitali from Starward Distillery in Melbourne.
Hey, Becky. Hi, guys. Really excited to be a part of this. It's my first virtual tasting, like probably a lot of you, so it's going to be fun.
Cool. David, thanks so much for coming along. Next up, we have Kaitlyn Tsai from Kavalan.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's Kaitlyn from Kavalan, and it's a pleasure to join this virtual tasting tonight.
Kaitlyn, thank you so much for joining us. Kaitlyn is joining us from the distillery, and where she is in Taiwan right now, it is just after 1 o'clock in the morning.
It's in the midnight. Good.
Thank you so much. Okay, so last but not least, we have another distiller, Andrea Wilson. Andrea is Master of Maturation at Michter's. Hi.
Hi, everybody. So happy to be here. I'm so amazed because I always say whiskey brings people together, even in a pandemic. We're all together drinking whiskey. So it's an amazing thing. And thanks so much, Becky, for inviting us. And it's a wonderful cause, the Drink Trust.
I'm so pleased to have you all on board for our first tasting. So we've got our whiskies at the ready. Everyone who's watching, please leave any questions or comments that you've got about the whiskey. As we're going through, we'll be directing them to everybody involved, and we'll be answering as many questions as we possibly can. So we're on this for about 90 minutes, and let's just see how much we get through. So let's kick things off. Are you all ready to taste some whiskey? I hope you're at home going, yes, and screaming at your laptop or your iPhone or whatever it is you're watching this on. There's some really lovely comments coming in too. Okay, so we're going to start this off. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to say goodbye now, and we're going to start off with a tasting with Louise. So, Louise, please can you talk people through the whiskey that we have here?
Yeah, so today we are tasting JJ Corry the Gale, number 2. And this is kind of our flagship blend. What I might do is I'll tell you a little bit about what we do. We're not actually a distillery. So I'll explain exactly what that means, and then we'll talk you through this. But the Gale batch number 2, we bottled it back in autumn. It's almost all gone now. There's not a lot of it left. There was only 2,800 bottles of this bottled. It's bottled at 46% because that's kind of what the whiskey told us it needed to be bottled at. That's how we kind of proof our whiskey. No chill filtration, no artificial color, just because we just don't do that. So it's called JJ Corry the Gale. So the name of our company is the Chapelgate Irish Whiskey Company, but our brand and all of our whiskies are named after JJ Corry. And what we are and what we do is we're whiskey bonders. And what that means in the context of Irish whiskey is that, very simply put, we don't distill, we never will. We very transparently and openly source our whiskies. My job essentially is to be kind of like a curator of casks. I built a bonded warehouse here on my farm in the west coast of Ireland. And what I do is I source new make whiskey. I source appropriate casks to put it into. I put them together, and then I mature it here on the family farm, right on the west coast. And then when that whiskey is ready, then we blend it to kind of create our own unique house style. So I'm essentially building a library of Irish whiskey flavors from all over the country, from multiple different distilleries, to pull flavor profiles from moving forward. We also source mature stocks of whiskey, ranging in age from 3 to 30. And those are some of the stocks that have gone into the Gale number 2. Whiskey bonding in Ireland was a very, very traditional part of the Irish whiskey industry up until about the 1950s. Irish whiskey had a very difficult time of it last century. We went from having several hundred distilleries on the island of Ireland in the 1800s to having only 4 or 5 by the early 1900s. And the reason for that was just basically geopolitical circumstance. Everything from war, famine, economic war, you name it. It almost killed the entire whiskey industry. We here at JJ Corry, we're part of the resurgence of the Irish whiskey industry as a whole. Just like in America and in Australia and all the world, whiskey producers all over the world, we're seeing a rise in craft whiskey making, craft distillation, small scale indie guys getting in on the game. And we jumped into the game with a view to initially, set up a grain to glass distillery. But when I discovered the history of whiskey bonding and the story of JJ Corry, who was a whiskey bonder in my local town from 1890 until his death in 1932, I decided instead of doing a grain to glass distillery, I was going to bring back the lost art of Irish whiskey bonding as part of our contribution. So if you drive around any town in Ireland at the moment, you'll still, even to this day, any mid-sized market town, you'll still see the term whiskey bonder written in gold letters on their windows or over their doors, because pretty much every town in Ireland had a whiskey bonder who was sourcing whiskey and then custom blending it for customers. So we do that very openly and transparently. The Gale is our flagship blend. What we have here is batch 2. Batch 1 was the first whiskey we ever released. And the thinking around this whiskey, again, because it's sourced, was to produce a really sort of fruit-forward, fruit bomb style of Irish whiskey, which, you know, people are kind of comfortable with and like to think sort of the Irish whiskey profile is. But the difference in the Gale is that we really went hard on the components of the blend. So it's a 60% malt, 40% grain blend. And in Irish whiskey, that's normally flipped. So the more ubiquitous sort of blends of Irish whiskey that are out there are normally, the blend is kind of the other way around. We went harder on the malt because we wanted a big, complex, bold, round, interesting blended Irish whiskey. And I founded the business back in 2016, and I went out and I sourced as much whiskey as I could. The whiskies in this range in age essentially from 10 years old in terms of the grain, all the way up to 29 years old in terms of our top dressing of the malts. The heart of this whiskey is 2002 and 2006 malts. On the nose, it has these lovely kind of green apple sort of tones to it. Really sort of like tropical fruits, green apple, you know, lovely sort of fruity sort of tones to it. That's very kind of considered. You know, a lot of our casks that we pull from have those tones in them because a lot of the older stock in Irish whiskey has that kind of personality. When we blend this, we essentially make 4 different vattings of whiskey of the 4 different vintages that have gone into it. So there's a 2010 vintage, a 2002, a 2006, and a 1991. We vat all of those separately in separate individual vattings after pulling very often sort of partial disgorgement from our casks. And we let those sit for a while, and then we marry them together at the end of the process. So we're very intentional about the direction, particularly for the Gale, because it's our flagship. You know, we always wanted to sort of be getting better and evolving. Gale number 1 is quite different to Gale number 2, even though the ratios are just about the same in terms of what we put into it. It's just that all the whiskey in cask is about 3 years older. So this is kind of like a grown-up version. So after the nose, you've got those lovely sort of green apple tones. And then if we take a sip, you know, for me, the palate on this is always kind of really unctuous. You know, we bottle at 46%. You'd never really know it, certainly on the palate, just because of the balance here. You kind of get hit with all of those white stone fruits and those kind of tropical notes right there. And then you get a bit of kind of bergamot on kind of the mid palate. And then my favorite element about the Gale is the finish goes on basically forever. And that finish is coming straight out of the grain, because every time we blend this, we vat our 1991, we vat our 2006, we vat our 2002. We put the malt vattings together and let them sit, and then we add the grain. And every single time we add the grain, the finish just elongates by 10 to 15 fold. There's a lovely sort of creamy mouthfeel as well going on there. It coats the tongue. And the finish for me is really kind of only sort of stopping now. So it's we're very proud of it. You know, the Gale has won lots of awards. If you care about awards, we do sometimes, we don't other times. But I'm very. It's a lovely whiskey for me. It's my go-to. Great summer drinker. Lovely by the fire as well in the wintertime. It's a real kind of all-rounder. Only 2,800 bottles of Gale 2 made. We're about to go on to batch 3, which will be similar to this, but, you know, again, with a little bit of variation. So enjoy.
Louise, it's such a wonderful whiskey. I love that bergamot note as well that you were talking about. That's just so wonderful. I enjoyed whiskey as much as I have. It's delicious. I've got a question for you, because obviously being an Irish whiskey of you, which you're the only one, how important is that at the moment? Because obviously we've been through this period of having virtually no Irish whiskey distilleries, and the majority of Irish whiskey has just been made by 1 or 2 distilleries. So now we have all of these brands. How do you ensure that all of the whiskey that you're working with has different flavor profiles, and how important is it to be a whiskey bonder like right now?
Well, it's really exciting, because when I started the business, there were 3 distilleries making whiskey on the island of Ireland. 3. And that would be very, very boring. Like if I was just blending 3 different 3 different distillates forever and ever, who cares? There are now probably about 28, 29, right? So it's a really good time to be a bonder, because my job, and I really take this very seriously, I'm a curator, I'm a librarian of casks. I have to build a library of flavors for the long term, that have to sit in my rack house out here in the farm, that I'm going to be pulling from in 5 to 10 years. So I think it's better than being a distiller, but I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I'm going to get to kind of pull from all of these different flavor profiles moving forward. A lot of the smaller guys are being very adventurous and very non-compliant in accordance with kind of the technical file. They're taking out old traditional recipes and different kind of mash bills. You know, we have some open fire stills that are operating on the island. There's a lot of really small guys doing incredibly interesting things. And those are the guys, and that's the kind of distillate that I want to collect and curate, because that's what's going to bring sort of the variety outside of the bigger producers. And of course, I source from the bigger producers as well, because the quality is A++. But it's the smaller parcels here and there of guys doing madcap things up the side of mountains that's really fascinating. So it's a great time to be a bonder. I won't be the last bonder. You know, it's a traditional part of the industry that is coming back, and one that has to come back, you know, because if Irish whiskey is going to really be reborn again, we need those traditional elements of the business back.
I've got a question for you, Louise, from the Malt Cask. Hi, Etienne. So how many casks or distilleries do you use for the batch? I'm assuming he's meaning batch 2 of the Gale there.
Okay, so there's not a lot of variety here, because there can't be, because the stocks range in age from 10 to 30. So it's going to be from the Gale is going to be from the big 3, you know, the big traditional distilleries that would be on the island. You just can't, like, it's older stock. So anything that's older than 6 years is going to be from those guys. We've only used a new distillery one time. We have a new whiskey coming out called the Hanson, and that uses a newer distillery. But we have lots of the stock sitting in the rack house that's maturing. You won't see that come through for us for 5 years, because we have to wait for it to mature and give it time.
Oops. Absolutely, Louise. So thank you so much for that tasting.
Thanks for having me.
What did everyone think of the Gale batch 2? I know we saw a nice message there from Georgie Bell, who's also my co-founder of OurWhisky. Thanks for joining us, Georgie. Who is so pleased to finally be tasting one of your whiskies, Louise. I don't think she's had one before, so
great.
That's amazing. All other questions that are coming through right now, we'll ask again just at the end. I loved what you said about being a librarian of casks. That's just beautiful. Love that. Louise, thank you so much. Right, so if everyone's had their first whiskey, I probably should have done this before, but I'm going to do it now because we're moving on to quite a high strength. So if you are new to nosing and tasting whiskey, then my suggestion is to have a nose of it. Don't shove your nose all the way in. Just hold it about a couple of inches beneath your nose, have a bit of a smell, and then a little bit of a taste. Roll it around the tongue, If you need to add water, then add some then, just to reduce the strength a little bit. Obviously, once you add water, you can't take any out. So add a drop at a time, see how you get on. We're going to move on to the next whiskey now. So I always like to have a taste of water in between, which I'll do in a second. So I'm going to introduce our second whiskey maker, who is Dhavall. Hi.
Hi, Becky. Hello. Hello,
Hi,
everyone.
Dhavall. Whereabouts are you right now?
I live in Edinburgh, so I'm under lockdown at the moment. So I'm trying my best to work from home as much as I can. But for those of you who don't know, the distillery is based in Lake District, English Lake District. We are around 15-20 minutes from Keswick, the famous tourist destination in Lake District. Just to give you an idea about the distillery was founded and we started distilling in 2015. And we are a single malt whiskey company. Even though we are in England, our style is very Scotch-like, but we have our own interpretation on certain processes. The way now, I come from a brewing background and also a blending background at McGuane, so it's very, very wood forward, sherry-led, and it's jam-packed of flavor profiles and mostly dry fruits, sultanas, raisins, dark chocolate. Just to give you a little bit before we go into the whiskey side of things and tasting it, which I'm looking forward to it. I want to give you an idea about the distillery and what makes us unique, or what are the differences in the process that we have. So, like I said earlier, we follow the Scotch Whisky Association rules and regulations. So nothing different from a process perspective from Scotland. But then we have our own interpretations on how we do certain things. And we use unpeated malt, first of all, to start with. So everything we have been using from the very start has been unpeated. We have a clear wort. We currently produce two different types of new mix spirit. We have one type A and type B. Type A is our light to medium, fruity, estery, much more creamy. And type B is much more heavier profile, which has a bit more sulfur content, and it's mostly a component from blending. Even though I'm a whiskey maker, but I'm a blender. So Lakes is a whiskey, single malt whiskey made by a blender. So you'll see all this blending concepts being used at different parts of the process. So first of all, for type A, our lighter new mix spirit, it's a clear wort, which gives us a lot of fruity character, more esters in the spirit. And fermentation is where I love changing things around. So we currently use 3 different yeast profiles. So one of the yeast is a classic M strain, which is, gives us the base. And the concept I borrowed from the perfume or fragrance industry is the flavor triangle. So for the new mix spirit, I kind of split it up into the top notes, middle notes, and the base notes. And for each of those areas, I have different yeast that give me those flavor characteristics. And one of the yeast that we also use is a heritage yeast, which was used in the Scotch whisky industry, but discontinued because the yields were very, very poor. So to give you an idea, a yield is how much alcohol you can produce per ton of barley. So if we use this heritage yeast, which was stopped being used in the industry, we get around 300 liters of alcohol compared to the standard 400, 405 liters of alcohol. But it gives me that waxy character. It gives me a lot of creaminess and oiliness. So that creates sort of my base layer that I require in the new mix spirit. The middle layer is the classic M strain, which gives me the classic floral fruitiness. Estery character, and the top layer is a French yeast that we use that gives us that quite top notes, a little bit fruity, a little bit more on the estery character, but more citrusy characters that gives me the top notes. Every time you know the new mix spirit, the first thing that comes out are the top notes. Now, what we do is we use 3 different yeast in different combinations during the whole week, and the entire spirit from that whole week is blended together based on my recipe to give me that flavor that I'm looking for in my type A spirit. And then comes the distillation part. The unique thing we have at Lakes is 2 different kinds of condensers. after the stills. One is a stainless steel condenser, and one is a copper condenser. So for our type A light new make spirit, we use the copper. And for our slightly heavier type B, we use the stainless steel condenser. And then my area of study, I'm a student of maturation, and also very specific. Maturation is a very, very broad term, and you can spend a lifetime learning about it. But my whole area of study is sherry cask and sherry cask maturation. So this is my instrument of choice. This is where I play the tunes, and that's where we use different kinds of sherry cask. But the primary component that we use is Oloroso sherry, which is an industry standard, which gives me the backbone at the spirit, the structure. And then I use PX and Pheno cask to give me different layers and complexities that I require in the blend. But when I say I just use Oloroso cask, we have probably around 16 different types of Oloroso cask, different levels of fruitiness, different levels of spice, some more towards the ginger character, some more towards a dry fruit character. The other thing that we do after the new make spirit is made, before cask filling, we also do very, very slow reduction. And this is a technique that I borrowed from the cognac or the brandy industry, where the new make spirit is reduced very, very slowly, rather than opening the tap up and reducing from 70% alcohol to the cask strength that the strength and the filling strength. We take it over time. So for example, on a typical process, it might be 5, 10, 15 minutes to reduce it all the way from 70. For us, our reduction is trickle reduction, which is around 8 liters per hour. So it is very, very slow reduction. And what I have found out is that by doing that, it allows us to create much more. It allows us to maintain the esters and flavors that we have created in the front of the process. And then in the maturation stage, again, borrowing from the cognac industry, the brandy industry, I follow élevage process. And élevage is more than just finishing a cask. So what I do is I'll start a process of whiskey with, let's say, an Oloroso cask. And it might have the ginger, the dry fruit character that I require, but I might need more mouthfeel. I need more creamy texture. Then I might move that liquid into PX casks that give me that character. And then I might move the entire thing into a French oak cask to give me the aromatic profile that I'm looking for. So that's the complicated process, but we like doing that because that gives us the character that I'm looking for. So now that
Dhavall, it sounds so intricate, your whole process. There is so much going on from this small distillery in the Lake District. That's the innovation that you've got going on. How many different types of spirit are you producing there? Is it just the one?
Right now, just 2 types of new make spirit, all single malt for lakes. But again, like I said, I'm a blender, so I love to blend things. So before I fill into the cask, I will blend type A, type B in different proportions. So basically, I'm blending even before the cask starts maturation. Most of the blending happens after the cask has been filled and after it's aged, and then you start blending. But I start my blending process way early. So rather than looking from front to end, what we did was the style that I love drinking and the style I love creating is sherry cask, very sherry, heavily sherry style. So I look at the style that we wanted to create at Lakes and then work backwards on what kind of new make spirit we require to match those casks rather than buying a cask to match the spirit. I hope that makes sense. So it's kind of taking the other approach. Like I said, today we'll be tasting the Lakes single malt Whiskey Makers Reserve number 2.
Number 2.
And again, just to, sorry.
Talk us through it.
Yeah. So just for one thing to clarify is this is cask strength whiskey. It's bottled at 60.9%, but I'll let you decide. When you nose it, you won't feel the alcoholic burn or strength. And that is the layering technique that you use in blending that allows you to create much more deeper flavors without having that hit on the nose. And the bottling, we also bottle at natural color. So we don't use any coloring whatsoever. So all the color that you see in the liquid is coming from those sherry casks. And also it is a non-chill filtered. So everything is non-chill filtered. At all the products at Lakes are non-chill filtered. Now, about the whiskey, first of all, it's important to note that we used to have Whiskey Makers Reserve #1. This is #2. Again, this is not a batch process, so this is not batch 2 of our product. It is just a different style, different expression, different creative expression of the liquid. So the DNA between all the Whiskey Makers Reserve is the same. It is very, very sherry-led, full of flavor, dry fruit characters, dark chocolate, but there are certain nuances. So the Whiskey Maker 1 was much more on the face, much more bold. #2 is slightly more restrained, more elegant. It's supposed to be more comfortable in its place. #3 that's coming out is much more aromatic, much more seductive. However, the makeup moves around thing because I like to express different emotions through the language of whiskey. So that's the reason for having different styles of Whiskey Maker Reserve. Now, Whiskey Maker Reserve, so, it's, as I said, it's 60.9%. And it's a combination of PX cask, red wine cask, and just 1 or 2 bourbon casks that I like just to add a little bit of lightness, that vanilla, and a little bit of tropical fruit character. That is, but it is sherry-led. It's very, very heavily sherried. And lot of dry fruits on the palate, sultanas, dry figs, dates. You have, the nose has a lot of vanilla, toffee, a lot of chocolate texture. And one of the things that I like is a very long finish. I use a little bit of French oak in the whole makeup as well, that allows me to get that aromatic profile as well. So when you nose, and there are the spices, nutmeg, cinnamon, those coming out, those are coming out from the French oak component that is used in the part of the process.
Dhavall, it's an incredible whiskey. How, when you're using such cask with such a robust flavor profile, how do you prevent that from overwhelming such a young spirit that you're working with?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And I think, and particularly one of the things about one of the casks, French oak, that's why it's used. Like, if you don't control the French oak, it can completely overpower the whiskey, make it very bitter and give it a lot of tannins. And that's why I keep on nosing all the casks. And, that's one of my jobs is thousands of casks. I have samples every week coming through. I keep a tab on all the liquid profile that is developing. And ultimately what I'm trying to find is the right peak of maturation where the extractives that I need from the cask are balanced by the distillery character and also by the oxidation. And when I think it's a right, I try to blend it out. But the blending process for me, it's a much more longer process. It can take probably a year or 2 for me to create the product profile that I'm, taking care of. And mostly what I'm doing with the whiskey is I'm not forcing it into a particular flavor profile. I'm just nudging it into the direction that I like. So it's like, you have teenagers growing up in a household, and one of the kids might like a lot of art and a lot of music, and you might nudge them into those creative fields. And one of the kids might be much more scientific, and you might kind of nudge them into that field. So what I'm effectively doing is not forcing anything, but I'm just trying to understand. I would call it like a cask whisperer, just trying to understand what it's trying to tell me, what I feel, and then I kind of nudge the whiskey in those directions.
So far we have a cask librarian and a cask whisperer amongst this. Beautiful. Who said the whiskey wasn't beautiful? It's incredible. I have a very specific question, again from the malt cask. It's probably a very simple one. So he said, are you using French red wine casks?
Yes. So I use a lot of different. So first of all, I use red wine casks that come from France, which might be made up of American oak or French oak. I also have a lot of sherry specifically coming from French oak cask as well. And I have virgin French oak cask as well. So yes, I do use a lot of French oak because I like the seasoning nature of it. So I don't use it in full proportion, but I just use it as a seasoning to give me that aromatic nature. But yes, to answer the question, I do have red wine casks are mostly from California, France, and Spain. So those are the 3 countries that I like for my red wine casks.
Beautiful. And I love how that's really fitting in with the theme of a world whiskey tasting as well, Dhavall, drawing on countries from around the world. Thank you so much. Guys, did you enjoy that whiskey from the lake? So that's Whiskey Makers Reserve number 2. It's still available to buy. I'll be posting links for all of the whiskies and where you can purchase them from in the comment section at the end of the tasting. So you'll be able to click on those. Again, there are lots of questions coming in about the whiskies, which is brilliant. Let's answer them all at the end. So stay with us until the end and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible. Devar, thank you so much.
Thank you, Becky.
Thanks. Okay, so I hope all of you got past the 60.9% ABV on that one. I know you can't really take, it's not really there on the nose. It's there on the palate, but just a touch of water if you need it. Don't be afraid to do that. That is absolutely fine. We're going to be moving on to our next whiskey now, which, sticking with the red wine cask theme, is another distillery on the other side of the globe. So we're going to head over to Australia now. Down under to with David, who actually isn't in Australia at the moment.
No, I moved myself and the family to the United States, so I'm definitely in lockdown. Yeah, but having a ball over here, spreading the Starward word, has been amazing.
Amazing. So this is David Vitali, and he founded a distillery called Starward in Melbourne. What I love about this distillery so much is that it really does draw on these beautiful red wine casks that you have from all these amazing wineries, vineyards from around the region. So David, it's over to you, and your whiskey is Starward Nova, which is a brilliant whiskey. So tell us all about it.
Thanks, Becky. So I'm going to give you a bit of background, I guess, to the Australian whiskey industry without going into a history class. But, you know, we've been making whiskey in Australia since the late 1800s. 1862 was the first mass-produced, mass-scale single malt whiskey distillery. So our history in whiskey and our love for it, you know, dates back quite some time. And you know, it is anchored in like that Scottish tradition, a salt style. So when we started in 2007, I guess there were 2 kind of paths that we could take. You know, one of them was to think about a whiskey that was, you know, a modern take on a traditional Australian style, or just to kind of drop the tradition bit and think about it as a modern Australian whiskey. And that's kind of what we did, because thinking about particularly Melbourne and our hometown, really what we do, particularly with cuisine, is kind of marry the old and new and kind of come up with something that's new, you know. And so there's no accident that this is called Nova in that context. And so we started in 2007. Well, I incorporated the company in 2007, April 2007, so just turned 13. And really started to think about what it was that we wanted to do. At that point in time, there were about 5 single malt whiskey distilleries, most of them in Tasmania, the brands like Sullivan's Cove and Lark and Helios Road. I'm pretty sure all of those are available, particularly in Europe, but also in spatterings in the United States. So it was great. Like, I kind of walked into this industry knowing that we could make great whiskey. And it was really then about, what does it mean to be a modern Australian whiskey? And fortunately for us, unlike the EU and the United States with bourbon and Scotch and whiskey generally, you can shoot a cannon through our legislation. It's so broad. Like, it's basically a fermented grain mash that's distilled and spends a minimum of 2 years in wood. In fact, that age statement requirement predates the Scotch whiskey age statement requirements, which is kind of interesting little factoid. So I think the regulators were kind of encouraging. It's a very elegantly simple regulation that encourages us to really push the boundaries of what whiskey can be. And I think that most whiskies from around the world talk to the place they're made. You know, when you know, the greatest of them also incorporate that idea of culture. So for me, if we're going to be a modern Australian whiskey, it needs to kind of be accessible. You know, the first person to put out their hand and shake you at a party. It needs to be flavorful and you know, have some rich characteristics. It needs to be approachable. You know, like something that is distinctive in character, but not necessarily an acquired taste. And of course, source those ingredients from locally. And Becky kind of touched on the fact that we use Australian wine barrels almost exclusively. We've got some projects I've got on the back wall there that are different barrels, like a cognac cask, and we've got a bourbon cask, and we've got all these little small 1%ers on the side that we do. But the releases that we make and bring to market are matured in Australian wine barrels, mostly Australian red wine barrels, and particularly in Nova, it's 100% Australian wine barrels. Now, I said this once in Glasgow, and I know we've got an audience for sure in Scotland, but Starward
so David,
is more.
Be careful what you say about Glaswegians.
Thank you. But you know, I did say this once that Starward is more Australian than Scotch is Scottish, because we're sourcing all of these barrels from Australian wineries in a way that, you know, other distilleries are sourcing them from Portugal, Spain, France, California. And, you know, to me, that's a lovely thing that we can say, well, this is genuinely an Australian whiskey, which is pretty exciting. And, you know, all those ingredients, the malted barley, the barrels, obviously the water, are all within a day's drive of the distillery. And I guess in Europe, that can be quite a long way away, but certainly in Australia, that's not very far at all. So being able to source those ingredients locally is a great advantage. But more importantly, and particularly when it comes to the wine barrels, it means that we're able to use them really quickly. So we can have barrels emptied on a Wednesday and then our new make spirit put in on a Friday morning. So wine goes out, whiskey goes in. And so there's no shaving, toasting, or recharring in a lot of that whiskey that we're drinking today. There's a bit of it in there. Often we'll get these amazing heirloom barrels from a winery, and we can't use them right away. So we will shave, toast, and rechar them, because otherwise the wine will taint the whiskey if we don't process it quickly. But the majority of the whiskey that we're drinking is that wine out, whiskey in approach, which then means you get this amazing color, all of that red hue from the wine barrels. Now, let's taste, because I think that's kind of what we're here to do.
Let's get some whiskey in us.
When you get your nose to Starward, I think, you know, the fruit is kind of the dominant characteristic, and just like Dhavall was saying, a lot of that is actually fermentation characteristics. So a lot of that orchard and tropical fruit note comes from fermentation of our wash, you know, the beer that we're making. And it's a hybrid yeast, so it's both a distilling yeast, which kind of drives a lot of those orchard characteristics, but also a brewing yeast, which brings out a lot of those tropical notes. So within 3 days, we've got this product ready to kind of distill. It's closest, I guess, to a Belgian sour. You know, if you were drinking our beer before we distilled it, and then through the distillation process, a lot more of that spice and you know, pepper, spice, and clove characteristic come to the fore alongside those orchard characteristics. I kind of feel like our new make is more like a barley schnapps than it is an immature spirit that needs time in wood. And that's kind of fortunate for us, because Melbourne's kind of famed for its 4 seasons in a day. So it doesn't need long in wood to kind of extract all of that character from the oak and evaporate all of the volatile alcohols. So, you know, within about 3 Melbourne years, we've got a product that's ready to bottle, and that's what you're drinking at the moment. Our first releases were under 3 years, or about 2.5. We felt like they were right. I mean, those whiskies won, you know, best in class awards around the world. But if we want to sell in the UK, we needed to compromise and age it for an extra 6 months to meet the minimum requirement of whiskey in the UK or in Europe, which is a minimum of 3 years. So, it's still a 3-year-old whiskey. It is young, but it doesn't behave like a 3-year-old whiskey because of, I guess, the quality of barrels that we're using, but also that climate that we have. So really, really approachable, fruity characteristics, a bit of baking spices on the nose. I think when you taste the whiskey, and cheers, it's 10 a.m. in Seattle, so never a bad
Good morning. Breakfast whiskey.
Yeah, exactly. So on the taste, you're going to get a lot more of that berry characteristic coming through, and the wine notes come in. The interesting thing about using wine barrels, and particularly wet wine barrels, is that winemakers are using barrels for structure to age their wines, to cellar their wines. And so part of that is tannins. That tannin characteristic in wine gives it length of age. So this whiskey doesn't have that tannic quality because the tannins are in the wine, not the barrel. And that's an amazing kind of gift that these wine barrels offer us. So you get a lot of that fruit coming through, baking spices, and toasty oak characteristics, I think, on the palate. This is at 41%. Coming back to that idea of approachability, when we did look at the first releases, just like Louise said, this was the ABV that the whiskey told us it wanted to be at. And we did some blind tastings from 40% ABV right up to 50% ABV. And I was going to just let the whiskey kind of decide. And, as a team, we never agree on anything. But this was one of the very first times that we unanimously agreed that 41 was the number that the whiskey needed to be bottled at.
I've got, David, I have a couple of questions for you that are coming in right now. And I'm going to read them both together because they're very similar. So it's about how the climate is affecting maturation. So the first one comes in from a whiskey-loving pianist. So does the Angel share, and he assumes that's higher than in Scotland, help shape the character of Starward's whiskey? And as an addition, we also have this one from Reikachu, who says, how does the climate affect this expression? Is there any specific character that brings?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, it is a lot faster. And interestingly, typically in Scotland, alcohol goes down. It's a more humid environment. And so alcohol evaporates because the air is so dense with water. There's nowhere for the water to evaporate. In Melbourne, it's a lot drier, so we'll have our alcohol go up, evaporate water in, which is a nice win for us. So that's the first interesting note about how it affects and shapes the whiskey in barrel. Because of that, we go into the barrel at a lower proof point, a lower alcohol content. So it's at 55 as opposed to the typical 63.5 that's traditionally done with single malts. That's more expensive because we're, got less barrels. We need more barrels to put all of that alcohol in, but it makes for a better whiskey. And as the alcohol goes up, we're slowly extracting more out of those barrels. In terms of character, it obviously is a far more concentrated spirit at the end of the period because of that evaporation of water. So we just need to be mindful, and as Dhavall was saying, continually sample the whiskies through the maturation period to make sure that we've got the right characters coming through. Our winemakers in Australia use 200-litre barrels and 300-litre barrels. So that gives us some light and shade, some complexion to the spirits. And every now and then, and in fact, some of the first releases of Starward were in 100-litre barrels, straight from the winery. So that 100, 200, 300-litre barrel gives us not only lovely diversity from the winemakers, but also complexion that we can draw on to bring out specific characteristics in the spirit.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So David, the Nova is incredible. I think I think it's an amazing whiskey which demonstrates that sort of real Australian kind of style, which really you're, along with some of the other distillers in Australia as well, you're really just pioneering and creating that style for Australian whiskey, which is really interesting. There's a comment here from Bobby Childs. Love Starward. I'm curious if there were other Australian wines used that didn't result in a rewarding whiskey. Now,
yeah,
I think everyone can agree that there's not every cask finish or cask maturation works. Would you agree with that?
Right. So we've got, I mean, we're blessed with amazing winemakers, and just because you've got a $80 wine, that's been in a barrel, it doesn't necessarily equate to an amazing Starward wine barrel. And so we have a team of winemakers on our team. They're part of the blending team and the maturation team that basically work really closely with winemakers to understand their wood policy, because we then have effectively a Rosetta Stone to say, well, that's going to make a better whiskey for us than those ones over here. And a good example of that is just how long the wine barrel's been at the winery. So if it's a 6 or 7 or 8 year old wine barrel at the winery, probably not going to be that great for us. I mean, we're going to get a lot of that vinous characteristic, the wine characteristics, the berries coming through, but none of that oak backbone, which is really important for us.
Absolutely. Well, brilliant. Well, best of luck with experimenting with different types of Australian wine, David. Look forward to seeing what more you guys can come up with from Starward. Really exciting. Thank you. Again, guys, please leave your comments about what you think about Starward Nova, which you've just tasted there. Again, this is going to be available in some links I'll be posting at in the comments at the end of the session. David, thank you so much. I'm going to be posting just a few of these comments up as we go through. Beautiful black pepper note on the finish, aromatic without any spice or heat. And then this is lovely as well, sipping on some Solera Reserve, which is amazing as well. So thank you, David. Appreciate that. Thank you so much. Again, if you've got any more questions for David, then please leave them in the comments and we'll come back to them at the end. Thank you. So I hope you all enjoyed Starward Nova. So far we've been to Ireland, we've been to England, we've been to Australia, to Melbourne, which is quite the world trip already. We've been halfway around the world. We're going to have to start making our way back again, depending on which way around we've gone. I suppose we've gone to Ireland first. I have to apologise. If anyone's used to seeing a live stream that I've been involved in so far, which has been quite a few during lockdown, my cat Isla likes to make an appearance, and she's just decided to sit on my lap. So please, please don't worry if you see a random cat head just pop up in the middle. So, so we're moving from Australia. We're going to go to the Far East now. So we're going to head over to Taiwan, and of course, it's none other than Kavalan. So we're there with Kaitlyn. Kaitlyn, hi. How are you doing?
Good evening, everyone.
Hi,
Hello.
Kaitlyn. So, Kaitlyn, you are the global ambassador for Kavalan.
Yeah. So
thank you so much for joining us. So, we're thrilled to have Kavalan involved in this tasting. I don't know if everybody here has tasted Kavalan before, but you're going to be talking us through your classic single malts. That's right?
Yeah.
Great. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so it's my privilege to be staying up late and practicing social distancing and tasting Kavalan whiskey with you tonight. We are 7 hours ahead of you, so it's almost 2 a.m. right here at Kavalan Distillery. And I'm quite curious about when is your first time heard of Kavalan? For me, it's when I was very young. I remember I watched a brand film of Kavalan, and at the end of the film, there is a very deep and male voice that Kavalan single malt whiskey, pure Taiwan. And at that time, I knew Kavalan is purely made in Taiwan, and it's made from 100% multi barley, and it's milled, mashed, fermented, distilled, and aged in Kavalan Distillery. And also, I learned that Kavalan is tightly linked to Taiwan. When it comes to Taiwan, maybe you will think of our night market culture, like our tasty food like beef noodles or bubble tea. But actually, we also have high quality hot springs and relaxing massages. Also, we have Kavalan whiskey right now. In cities, there are a lot of convenience stores. Almost every block open 24/7. I would say Taiwan is actually a subtropical paradise. You can take your holidays here and enjoy Kavalan whiskey. And just in case, after you taste our whiskey, maybe you would like to have a trip to Taiwan. From Heathrow International Airport to Bangkok, it's just 13 hours. And from Bangkok to Taiwan, it takes you only 3 to 5 hours. So almost in just 18 hours, you can visit Taiwan and also come to see our distillery, to see all the equipment we use. And I would love to give you a in-depth distillery tour for you. So I would say we started Kavalan really late in 2005 compared to our neighbor Japan's first distillery, Yamazaki, established in 1923. Taiwan was up to a late start in this region. And actually our founder, Louise, father and son, are whiskey connoisseurs just like you. And they have nurtured their dream of having a distillery in Taiwan for over 20 years. However, at that time, we have a monopoly system on alcohol businesses. So in Taiwan, only government can export, import, and sell alcoholic beverage and set up a distillery, brewery, or winery. So we have prepared for a very long time. And finally, in 2020 for Kavalan Distillery project, Taiwan officially joined World Trade Organization, and the monopoly system on alcohol businesses finally was lifted. So it took us, it's a record-breaking 9 months from zero for our distillery to up and running. It's just like delivering a baby. It sounds quite easy when we talk about having a distillery in Taiwan today. But 15 years ago, I think we never thought that there could be a distillery built on a far east island in the subtropical region. At the time, a lot of industry experts and friends discouraged our founders from realizing this Kavalan project. They said, if you look at those 5 traditional producing countries of like United States, Canada, Japan, Scotland, and Ireland, they are all in relatively cold regions. And furthermore, to build a distillery is never easy. You have to buy land, obtain the water right permits, construct your production site, and purchase all the equipment. And the most important part, I think, it may take 10 years or to turn a profit, waiting on the maturing whiskey to turn into actual sales and cover your costs. I have read an article. It said the cost of setting up a craft distillery, just a micro distillery, can cost you about $5 million. So at that time, actually, Kavalan seemed to be a huge waste of time and your effort years ago. But even everyone said that it's impossible. Our founders didn't give up his dreams. They believe whiskey can be an infusion of art and science. 70% we can rely on technology to overcome the difficulties for producing whiskeys in subtropical climates, and 30% we can, it will be the art of blending. We can create the unique flavors for our whiskey. And we were very lucky. We met the late consultant, Dr. Jin Swan. He's known as Einstein of whiskey. He mentored our blending team, and he helped set up the distillery and maintain twice yearly visits. He even stayed in our distillery for months. Even though we had Jin Swan as our consultant, it still took a lot of time for our team to learn how to improve quality in the heat. To be honest, we never thought that we could produce one of the best single malt whiskeys, recognized by the world in just in such short period of time. Before we taste our whiskey, let's look at the bottle. You may wonder why we named actually it is the owner of Yilan County. So it's also known as County of Water. It rains about over 188 days a year. So over a half of year, we are bathing in the rain. And from the local design, you can see that there is a AAA. It showcases that we insist on making high quality whiskey, as always. And every time when I nose Kavalan whiskeys, I feel it's like aromatherapy. It's very rich in the floral and fruity notes, and also delivers the boosting happiness. During these challenging times, we really need Kavalan whiskeys to help to get rid of bad mood. I think you can nose the green apple notes. It's actually coming from our new make spirits. Our new make spirits, we use one type of yeast is from South Africa. It delivers like green apple, mango, and pineapple flavors. And so this is the iconic square. We are inspired by Taiping one of the oldest building in the world. And you also can see the very beautiful amber color. And if you look at the legs move in your glass, you can find it's very thick and slow. Even if it's just a 40% entry level whiskey, it still can perform very good body and also the aromas and flavors. This one,
Kaitlyn, this is a beautiful whiskey. Would you describe this as being the entry level in the Kavalan range, the Kavalan ladder? And how do you think it complements the rest of the range?
The rest of this one, we also have, so this range is over 50% alcohol strength. It's from single cask, and recently we have more limited edition coming out, and also we just launched another entry-level series called Kavalan Distillery Select series. It's more for mixology and bartending. Also, it's good for either drinking in it or on rocks or in various cocktails. So this one, I would say, it's a very single malt. We use first fill bourbon cask, first fill sherry cask, and also some refill cask. So you can note the distinctive tropical fruits and also with a sweet burst of mango and pineapple, and very beautiful the floral notes. It's like it also have a ripe apple notes. It's like the apple brandy Calvados. This whiskey is quite warm and smooth on the palate. It's not burning at all, and it can be daily drink. In my bedroom, I have a bottle. I think before you go to bed, you just drink 10 to 15 milliliter. It can help you sleep very well until morning. Even this one is an aged German whiskey, aged for around 4 years. But actually, Taiwan's hot climate actually pushes the whiskey in the cask to mature 2 to 3 times faster than cold whiskey making regions. So imagine the high heat in summertime, it can reach up to 40 degrees Celsius. Just like you're cooking a gravy, as longer you cook, it becomes sticky and flavorsome. And as I mentioned, Yilan is in the northeastern part of Taiwan. So, and it's also on the border of 2 main mountains in Taiwan. So it's like a hand to receive the cold winds from Siberia in winter time. And the cold winter, actually, it can maximize the process of oxidation for our whiskey. So it make Yilan, this place, the best place for Taiwan to make our whiskey. And a lot of the distilleries will say their casks are sleeping in the maturation warehouses. In Taiwan, because of this kind of drastic climate, we always joke that our casks are quite stressful because it's like you are doing sauna for a half hour and then you have to jump into a swimming pool floating with ice, and this repeats for 4 to 6 times. So it's very stressful, and this kind of hot and cold influence actually add our whiskey the depth and color and flavor to the whiskeys that define Kavalan whiskey. And on the downside, the warm and humid climate actually means a higher evaporation loss compared to 2 to 3% for Scotch or Irish whiskeys. So
It's
again,
interesting. It's interesting you say that, Kaitlyn. We have a question from another one of our top commenters so far tonight, the whiskey loving pianist, who says this one is arguably more Scottish than the rest of the range discussed. Would you agree with that?
Can you say that again?
Would you agree that this whiskey is more Scottish than the rest of the range that Kavalan produces?
Yeah, it's more floral and fruity. And some judges from the international competition, they say it's like a space-sized single malt. Yeah, so maybe it has some characters of Scotch whiskey. And okay, so again, what makes our whiskey so unique is Taiwan's nature, and in particular, it's our subtropical heat and the pure water. So we can change the climate to suit our whiskey. So we're trying to harness the heat to intensify the interaction between spirit and the wood. And more rapid extraction of desirable flavor compounds from our wood. And I will say on the water we utilize springs in Snow Mountain, it highest mountains in Taiwan. It's even 100 meters taller than Mountain Fuji. It's very high. So even in subtropical climate, in winter time, it can be covered by snow on the top of mountains. So it was called Snow Mountain. And the spring, it imparts a smooth and creamy mouthfeel to the whiskey. So when you taste this one, it's 40%, but it can still very smooth and mellow on the palate, and you don't feel that alcoholic taste. And thank you so much for your precious time tasting Kavalan whiskey with me tonight. Feel free to leave your comments.
Thank you.
Yeah, and questions. So the next I would like to share with you is in our culture we have a Gandhi culture. We're doing Gandhi, so which means so if you can raise a glass with me and we can say Gandhi together.
Gandhi.
Gandhi. Gandhi. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. Thank you. Guys, please let us know what did you think of the Kavalan. If you've not tried Kavalan before, I think it's a beautiful introduction to this lovely distillery. Incidentally, the most visited distillery in the world in Taiwan. So if you're ever in that part of the world, then you must go and have a visit because it's spectacular. Please, well, I hope you enjoy the Kavalan, and if you're interested in trying any more, the Solo Strange is wonderful. So please go and have a try. Kaitlyn, thank you so much. That's been amazing. Kanpai. We'll always do that from now on.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so amazing. So we've just been to Taiwan. So we have done, I'm losing track, Ireland, England, Australia, Taiwan, and now we're heading off somewhere else as well. So if you have your whiskey tasting packs with you, you'll probably have guessed what the next one is because it's written on the bottle. If you haven't got those tasting packs, then obviously the lovely surprise is that we're heading to Kentucky. So I'm heading over to Kentucky to see Andrea Wilson over at Michter's Distillery. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, everybody. How is everybody this evening? This is great fun. I mean, it's such a joy to be with my colleagues in the industry as well, making great whiskeys from all over the world. So this is a great evening. Welcome to Kentucky. I am at the distillery today. So Kentucky Bourbon, I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. It is an $8.6 billion business for the state of Kentucky. We actually have more barrels aging here than we do people living here. So we have about 2 barrels for every person who lives here. So just a little fun fact for you. And so to make Kentucky bourbon, you have to, our rules are a little different than Scotch or Irish or Japanese or any of the other whiskeys that are out there. So we have to use at least 51% corn. We have to distill at 80% or less off the distill. We have to use new charred oak for our wood, and you cannot enter into the barrel at greater than 62.5% ABV into the barrel. So those are the general rules of guidance that you have to conform to. Now, when you come out of wood, you have to bottle at least 40% ABV, and you cannot use any color, flavor, or anything other than water to adjust the strength of the alcohol when you are complete. So those are the rules. Now, a little bit about Michter. So I'm the master of maturation here. So big shout out to my colleagues who use the terms, let's see, I wrote them down, librarian of cask and cask whisperer. So I was trying to think, so master of maturation, that's MOM. So I guess I'm a bourbon mom, if you will. So that's the role that I play here. So I'm mostly on the aging side. I work with our great master distiller, Dan McKee, who looks after the spirit side, the spirit making side of the business. So a little bit about Michter's and our history. Started in 1753 in Pennsylvania, and whiskey was being made there. It was rye whiskey. Changed hands a few times, closed during the faded time in the U.S. of U.S. Prohibition, where you couldn't sell whiskey. Then it was picked up in the 50s by a gentleman, Lou Foreman, who actually renamed the brand after his 2 boys. And his sons' names were Michael and Peter. So he merged their names together to make the name Michter's. Sadly, the distillery closed in 1989. And the family that owns it today, we are a family-held business, the Malioco family. They acquired the abandoned trademark in the 90s and started a journey to resurrect this wonderful brand. One of the first decisions they had to make was where to resurrect it. It would seem logical to resurrect it in Pennsylvania, but the family were not whiskey makers, so they thought we need to surround ourselves with a great team of people who know what to do. They chose to resurrect the brand in the state of Kentucky. We then went through 3 phases of production. The first phase was acquisition of stocks, so sourcing great barrels, and then began bottling. The second phase was contracting with a great Kentucky distillery, where they were able to have their recipe made on their behalf. So our ownership always says, like a chef using somebody else's kitchen for a while until they had the resources to build their own distillery, which is where I'm sitting today. So we have a beautiful distillery here in the Shively section of Louisville, Kentucky. We have an all copper column and pot still system here. It's produces a very clean, very beautiful spirit for us. We are also have a farm, which is about an hour and 15 minutes from here, where we have some warehouses, but we're also growing estate-grown grains that we hope to release some farm-to-table releases in the future as well. And then last year, we opened our brand home in downtown Louisville, which is about 10 minutes from the distillery, where we were able to acquire our old pot still system from Pennsylvania. It's also a copper system, and our old cypress wood fermenters, and we were able to install them. So we actually have a second distillery in downtown Louisville, which is housed in an old building called the Fort Nelson Building. It was a building that dates back to the 1890s. It was in terrible disrepair. The family purchased the building. We did a whole historic preservation on the building. And now we have a beautiful tourism facility, as well as on the second floor, we have the bar at Fort Nelson, which is a wonderful world-class cocktail bar with a menu that has been curated by cocktail historian Dave Wondrich, as well as our wonderful local bar team here, which is headed up by Carrie Kasler. So very excited about all of that. Unfortunately, right now that's closed due to our situation with the pandemic, but we hope to someday be able to share our whiskeys again with consumers at that location. So that's a little bit about all the things that we look after here. I do want to share this beautiful whiskey with you. So today we're going to be tasting the Kentucky Bourbon. So one of the things, obviously, when you look at it, it's got beautiful color to it. It's beautiful, kind of a darker amber color. Typically, this whiskey is going to be about 5 to 7 years old. It's 45.7% ABV. We are a distiller that really focuses on the quality of our whiskeys. We're not the biggest, we're not the smallest, but we have found that, doing things and looking after the details and attention to detail and the discipline of quality is what we're all about. So I love the fact that Kaitlyn was talking about art and science. That's a lot of what we focus on. We use the science to help guide us, but we are very traditional in that there's a tremendous amount of art that you have to look after. Then we have 6 different philosophies in how we make our whiskeys, and I'll talk about those in a second, but I want you all to start tasting this whiskey. So if you give it a nose, it's got some beautiful caramel and kind of sweetness associated with it. And I know that people say, well, can you really taste sweet? I always look at it as like if I were walking into a bakery. I feel like if you walk into a bakery, you actually smell sweet. I think that Kentucky Bourbon by nature tends to be a little bit sweeter profile. Beautiful nose, kind of caramel, a little bit of fruit. And then if you give it a taste, one of the things we focus on is nice mouthfeel, beautiful texture, easy drinking, nice long finish, and a whiskey that kind of gives you, we always refer to it in Kentucky as the Kentucky hug. It's kind of like a nice little warm hug that it gives you. But we want it to be smooth and rich and delicious and easy drinking. That's what we're really going for. So the philosophies that we look after, first we start with naturally air drying and seasoning the wood for at least 18 months up to 5 years. And one of the reasons why we do that is we want to get rid of bitter, astringent green characters from the wood that aren't necessarily what we're looking for in the making of our product. Secondly, then the wood goes into the cooperages and they will toast it for us before we char it. So the law requires new charred oak, but we take an additional step to actually toast that wood, which is the art of slow heating to extract more characters and flavors from the wood. Then we are going to enter the spirit into wood at 51.5% ABV, which is very low by the industry standard. So you remember I shared with you that Kentucky Bourbon can go into wood up to 62.5. We're actually, once we're entering into the cask, we're about 75% whiskey, about 25% water. That water is a powerful catalyst for a lot of beautiful barrel chemistry, which allows us to get a really rich product, which is what we're after. It's extremely expensive to do that because we're laying down a lot of water, you can imagine, but it's something that we really believe in as kind of core to the character profile of Michters. We also heat cycle our whiskeys. So Kentucky's great for aging whiskey because you get all these natural seasonal changes, the warm, humid summers, as well as the cold winters. But during the winter, when the cask would otherwise just be sitting there, we're actually going to heat up our warehouses to a certain set point liquid temperature. We'll hold there for a period of time, and then we'll naturally cool down the warehouses. And what that does is increase the interaction between the wood and the spirit to also increase the amount of extracted characters we can get from the wood. Then once we're ready to dump the liquid, we will take it out of wood, and we are going to do a custom chill filtration process. So every whiskey here at Michter's has its own custom designed process, with the variables being the type of filter system that we use, the type of filter we use, the number of filters we use, the size of filter, temperature, pressure, time. Change any one of those variables, you can change the outcome for that spirit. And that is something that is very, very important to us, because we really want to accentuate each and every whiskey's best qualities. And it's part of our signature. I know across the world, people have different belief systems about filtration, but it's something that we feel is signature to what makes Michter's whiskey, is our custom chill filtration process. And all of our whiskeys are single barrel or small batch. So small batch for us is the equivalent of 20 full barrels in a tank. That's all our tanks are sized for. So it's something that we're extremely passionate about in terms of our team here. We have an incredibly talented team. Every whiskey gets tasted. All the details are looked after as it relates to the specifications. But the attention to detail and discipline is what allows us to be so consistent and so beautiful. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share this with you, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Andrea, I don't know about everybody else who's listening right now and watching and following along, but I could listen to you talk about maturation for decades. I love it. I mean, I came out to Kentucky, was it last summer?
Mm-hmm.
Last summer. And we hung out at the Michter's Distillery, and also I got the chance to go over to the new site as well. And we even had a cocktail in that beautiful bar, one of David Wondrich's wonderful cocktails. And Andrea just blows me away with her knowledge about maturation, her experience with wood, your understanding of just everything that goes into making a cask. And there's this, we've had a really great comment from David Hogg, who works at Clydeside in Glasgow, who has said bourbon doesn't get enough praise, as there's so many great ones out there like Michter's. And as a distiller over here in Scotland, they give us some amazing casks to complement our new make spirits. So
thank you.
Obviously,
thank you very much.
Yeah. You know, I mean, a lot of people keep on going to Scotch, and the question I get asked quite a lot is, "Oh, isn't Japanese whiskey the best whiskey in the world, or isn't this the best whiskey in the world?" But ultimately, you know, the cask imparts so much flavor. And without very good bourbon to season those casks in the first place, then you wouldn't end up with such great whiskey from Scotland or England or elsewhere in the world. So big fan of Michter's. Guys, please leave us your comments. Like, what do you think about the Michter's that you've just tasted? So this is the bourbon. You have a whole range of whiskies. I know that I've tasted the rye, which is incredible. Tell us a little bit about some of the other whiskies real quick.
Yeah, so we do make a rye whiskey. It's a rye whiskey that we stay probably closer to 51% rye grain. And then we'll supplement with corn and malted barley to help balance the spicy nature of rye itself. Beautifully balanced, super smooth, easy to drink rye whiskey, as well as we have an American whiskey where we actually use some of our used bourbon cask to slightly adjust the flavor profile of the spirit. That is a super fun whiskey to drink. It is, I've had people tell me it's a breakfast whiskey if you're into that kind of thing. But just really lovely. And then we have the sour mash whiskey. So our sour mash whiskey is not a bourbon. It's not a rye, but it has corn, rye, and malted barley in it. But it doesn't conform to the definition of at least 51% corn or at least 51% rye grain. But It actually won Whiskey of the Year last year by the Whiskey Exchange. So we were super excited about that. And when that happened, it started flying off the shelves everywhere. So we were thrilled with that happening. But it's a very, very elegant whiskey to drink, and lovely if you have the chance to purchase that as well.
So, Andrea, just for people who are not really aware of the difference between a sour mash and a sweet mash, what is the difference between those two?
So the sour mash, we actually take a portion of the previous run and we mix it into the next batch. And what that does for us is when we're in the cooker, for example, it helps balance. So the malt imparts enzymes, and those enzymes are a little bit finicky. They like to have the right pH environment to do their job to convert the starch to sugar. And so adding a little bit of the previous batch helps us adjust that environment for them and helps them do their job really well. But it also gives us consistency from batch to batch. Whereas if we didn't do that, we would be starting just fresh with the yeast, and it's more of a sweeter environment.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Andrea, thank you so much for running us through the tasting of the Michter's bourbon. I hope you guys all enjoyed that whiskey. Something a little bit different from the others that we've had so far. So we had a blend from JJ Corry and some single malts from the Lakes Distillery, and we had Starward, and we had some Kavalan as well. So we've had some amazing questions come through. I'm going to bring everybody back into the stream, so we can ask a few questions to some of the distillers. So again, this is your chance. I'm aware that we're running very close to the 90 minutes we talked about. We can run for a little bit longer, I think, so long as people have questions. So please leave some in the comments if you have questions for any of these guys about some of the whiskies you've tasted, or any questions about the distilleries, or some burning thing you've always wanted to know, then please let us know. We've had a great one actually for you, Andrew. I'm going to dive straight back in because this one's I know you're going to struggle to answer this one because I always get asked what's my favourite whiskey. But so James Bunting has asked, what's your favourite whiskey that Michter's produces?
Well, I love them all, and you know that is a true statement. I would say if you looked at my home, what do I drink the most of? I have very much a bourbon palate, so I have a little sweeter palate. So I really probably drink the most of our bourbons, but I love the ryes as well because they're super balanced. But bourbon's probably it for me.
Absolutely. Louise, I want to go back to you actually, especially considering that lovely phrase that you used earlier of being like a cask librarian, which I think was just beautiful. We've got a question from a whiskey loving pianist who asked, would you ever consider releasing a single cask bottling if you found an exceptional cask in your library? Oh, Mike. There you are. There you are.
I think you're gone again.
Yeah, I can't, Louise, we can't hear you at all. Is your microphone on? Yeah. No. Well, we can come. Oh, no, I'm afraid not. I'll tell you what, Louise is going to leave and come back. We will ask her the same question again in a minute. We'll move on to somebody else because I've got quite a lot of really lovely questions coming in. So there was a great one for, let's see. Great one for Kaitlyn at Kavalan. So we've seen quite a few lovely bottles behind you there. One of the questions that's come in is, what are the whiskies behind you? In particular, the purple. Somebody thinks that's a new whiskey. Is that right?
Yeah, it's our new whiskey. It's a Kaitlyn Master series, port finish. So it was first in the refill cask. batch it together, and then we put into the Oloroso sherry cask for another two months for finish. So it's quite light and beautiful sherry notes. It's not a heavy sherry notes, but it's very light and refreshing. It's quite lovely expression we have in our finish series.
And is it available to buy now?
It's available in Taiwan, but we are trying to export to more countries in the end of this year.
Mm-hmm. I expect right now is very difficult.
Yeah, it's quite new. Mm.
Mm-hmm. I have another question for you that's come in as well, Kaitlyn. How have Kavalan's recipes or methods changed since the early Jim Swan inspired setup? Have you changed anything at all?
You mean recipe for a whiskey?
Yeah.
For our new make, it's all the same. And for our like Betty single malt, we always leave a batch for each recipe. So that is how we try to maintain the consistency and also the quality for our Betty single malt. For single cask, we have a blending team to select the high quality cask from our maturation warehouse to battle as cask strength single malt whiskey. So it doesn't change after Dr. Jim Swan leaves, but he left a huge legacy to Kavalan Distillery, of course. We are very grateful for that.
Absolutely. And for those of you who aren't aware, Jim Swan was a whiskey consultant who has basically worked on shaping some of the biggest names in whiskey that we see today. A lot of new distilleries have had him involved in creating their whiskey. So I just see that Louise is back with us. Louise, hi.
Hi.
Yes. Woo, yeah, we have Louise. Now, what was the question I just asked you? Would you ever consider releasing a single cask expression if you found an exceptional cask in your library?
Yes. So we have done that once already. So we had a 1991 cask, one of the first ever casks that we sourced. Literally one of the first, when we went out looking for casks, it was one of the first ones that we found. And the day that we tasted it, and we had 5 days of cask tasting. And on the 5th day, I went back to that one cask. It was an 8 series, 8382 or something. And I said, we're buying that cask and we're going to do something special with it because it's going to be really, really good. We launched that before Christmas. It was just 100 bottles. Cask strength 52%. It was called The Chosen. We worked with a cabinet maker, an Irish cabinet maker called John Galvin, and an Irish crystal maker called J Hill Standard to create this beautiful vessel for it, essentially. And we launched that before Christmas there. We have a couple of other casks in the collection now that are earmarked for single cask, but they're not there yet. We disgorge when the whiskey says it's time to go, I'm at perfection, let's disgorge. We probably have one more single cask, not this year, but maybe next year to do that with. But they're very few and far between. And when we do it, it's the highest kind of level stock that we have. So quick answer to the question is absolutely yes, but we don't do it very often.
Okay. Great answer. Look forward to seeing some single cask, but also seeing how also the Gale changes and evolves over the years as well into batch 3 and beyond too. So a great question there. I have one for Dhavall now, actually, at the Lakes Distillery. Dhavall, this one comes in from our probably top scorer when it comes to comments tonight, the whiskey loving pianist. Is there a longer term plan to steer the character profile for Lakes whiskey towards ages at 10, 15, 18 years of age?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I've been working on ever since I moved from Macallan over to Lakes. The plan is the future will have a no age statement whiskey, at the same time age statements, but not necessarily just incremental ages with the same profile. It might be different characters, different flavors at different ages. Because what I like is there are certain characters, whether you talk about red wine cask or whether you talk about sherry cask or bourbon, they have certain maturation peaks. So some casks are better at certain ages, while sherry might require a slightly longer period. Bourbon might be slightly early. So yes, that's the plan. So Lakes has a very, very solid a model that I work on, again, taking from my financial background, that I have already planned out all the way till 2045, 2047, what plans we are trying to release. So yes, that's a plan.
Mm-hmm. I've actually got a question for David next, and this is from me personally, which I'm sure you're going to love now. David, knowing how much Starward is a distillery that really has Australia and Melbourne at its heart, where do you see the distillery and the whiskies evolving to beyond wine costs? So will you be looking at any other aspect of, say, Melbourne or Australian culture to imbue? So, I mean, my natural thought, I used to live in Melbourne, is looking at coffee. Will we see something to do with coffee? Will we see something to do with beer, maybe?
That's a really good question. We've got our hands full at the moment just trying to get the message across, A, that Australia makes whiskey, and B, that, unlike wine finishes, which, there's been some amazing inspiration, and Kavalan's one of them, like amazing wine cask expressions, but they're not always, it's kind of like peat. A lot of them have been an acquired taste. And so we've got a lot of work to do to kind of get people to understand that they can be quite approachable and easy to drink. I think my blood content is equal parts coffee and equal parts whiskey. So it probably, and being of Italian origin, like that would be the obvious next step. We do a lot of projects, like cask finishes with ginger beer. We also explore other wine varietals. So there's a lot in the pipeline, but for the moment, it's going to be wine focused. I think culturally, it's probably more about how we serve the drink, with food. I mean, Melbourne's, if not one of the foodie capitals of the world, right? And so for me, we want to see whiskey at the dinner table, not around dinner, but at the dinner table, served, in long, refreshing drinks, and whiskey matured in wine barrels is the perfect foil to do that.
Definitely. I think it's really interesting to see how whiskey is going to be consumed going forward, and also bought, because obviously we are all in the same boat right now with this coronavirus pandemic, trying to do the best we can, get people to taste the wonderful whiskies that you guys are producing, which I'm really hoping that the OurWhisky Festival has encouraged and inspired some people to go out there and maybe purchase a bottle of something a little bit new that they maybe wouldn't have looked at before, because maybe they see themselves as a Scotch single malt person or a Japanese whiskey person. So I'm going to say thank you so much to all of you for joining us. A quick note is that all of the proceeds from the OurWhisky Festival are going to be donated to the Drinks Trust. So every single brand that's participating has donated a sponsorship to get this up and running, and to also, which will be donated to the Drinks Trust as well. So thank you to all of you for sharing your whiskeys and for your generous donations as well. I'm sure it will go a long way to helping some people who really need it right now. Just leaves me to say thank you. Enjoy the rest of lockdown.
Thank you very much for organizing this, Becky. Thank you.
Thank you. And best of luck with navigating everything right now. It's obviously been very difficult for everyone. I also need to say a huge thank you to a couple of partners of ours. So the Dram team, which has helped with logistics to get all of these lovely bottles out to everybody, who has ordered a tasting pack. Everybody has those in front of them, and that's come courtesy of the Dram team, and also Claxton's, the bottlers in Scotland as well, who've enabled us to put all of these together. Both of them have donated their time and resources to putting this together. So thank you so much to you guys for that. Thanks to everybody for joining along with the tasting. This has been brilliant. This is our first one. I think it's gone quite smoothly. There's 3 more to go. I'm afraid to say that tickets for the entire festival have now sold out. So if you were hoping to buy a ticket, I'm afraid you're out of luck. But that doesn't mean that you can't follow along with some of the tastings that we've got coming up. So the next one will be next Thursday on the 7th of May, and then on the 14th, and then the 21st of May as well. Please follow us at OurWhisky on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. All of these videos will be available to you, for you to watch at any time. So rewatch them, maybe go and buy a bottle. If you haven't got a tasting pack, then go and buy something, and then maybe rewatch the section where we have a whiskey maker introducing it. So guys, thank you so much. It's been wonderful. I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you. I've been Becky Paskin. Good night. Bye.